thank you for coming to our presentation, which is from BSI. I'm assuming you know who BSI are for various reasons. We do lots of different things. We are the UK National Standards Body. We do certification training and a wide number of things for our clients and for our customers. I'm here really to talk about the standards creation side of things, on things which are quite futuristic and quite forward-thinking for the supply chains and manufacturing supply chains here in the UK. So, with that in mind, let me have a think, before we start talking about supply chains and that, let's have a think about why this is important. One of the reasons it's important is because in what is now the last Parliament, we had a budget presented just in March, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer used the word productivity, I think it was 4 times, repeatedly. The government are really getting quite exercised and quite excited about low productivity in the UK and throughout our supply chains, and want to do something about it. If you have a look at some of the data, back in 2008 we had a really quite significant recession, a big crash that happened around then. And the United States, if you were to compare the performance of the United States to the UK, the US managed to carry on growing its productivity throughout that period, while since then productivity in the UK seems to have flatlined quite a bit. But that doesn't tell the whole story. If you look at the performance of specific sectors, the aerospace and automotive sectors have done very well in that period, and their productivity growth has really done quite well. There are other major manufacturing supply chains that didn't do quite so well in that period between 2009 and 2014. For example, chemicals and pharma, their labour productivity actually fell quite significantly. But that doesn't tell the whole story. For whatever reason, we are very good at measuring labour productivity, the output per hours worked, or the output per person, and things like that. A friend of mine, Steve Evans from the University of Cambridge, did some really interesting work in the last few years, looking at costs within manufacturing supply chains over quite an extended period. And he said something quite interesting. This is a very busy graph, but if you look at the period between 2004 and 2011, you'll notice that employment within UK manufacturing actually fell at a compound annual rate of about 3.7%. So that's 3.7% per year. At the same time, the labour costs, the direct labour costs incurred by those businesses fell by 3.2%. That's because we're very good at lean manufacturing. We're very good at lean. We are excellent at continuous improvement and getting more for less. That in itself tells a story. I don't think the government would be very happy with us continuing down a path where we reduce employment within manufacturing at a similar rate to this. So that in itself is probably not a positive outcome. If you look at the non-labour costs in the same period, i.e. resource costs and things like that, they actually grew by 0.4% a year over that period. And in 2011, they were 4.5 times bigger, those costs. And yet, all the focus was on reducing labour costs in a period when non-labour resource costs were increasing. So I would suggest that perhaps a bigger opportunity in just reducing employment and in increasing productivity, a bigger opportunity is actually focusing on non-labour resource costs and things like that. Okay. There is another side to this as well. I was at a presentation recently where a major aerospace prime said, stood up in the room and said, if you compare the UK supply chains to the global supply chains, the UK supply chains supply the product to spec less often than the global average. They also supply the part on time less often than the global average. And so they were a bit annoyed by this. And they were saying, look, if you want us to remain in the UK, you need to improve this. Okay, but let's have a little think about that. If we have had a period where there's been very little investment in our supply chains and reduced costs, labour costs, and reduced employment in our supply chains, perhaps that is a reason why our SMEs, our supply chains, find it more difficult to supply to spec because they are so lean that they are running out of capability. So that reduced number of jobs potentially reduces the flexibility and ability to adapt. And not looking after your non-labour costs, your resource costs, potentially means it leaves you open to resource shocks, perhaps spikes in oil prices and things like that. It means that your supply chains are a little less resilient than before. They are much more fragile, and it's something we really need to look at. And if we really do want to reverse this trend of reduced employment in our manufacturing supply chains, and we actually want to increase employment, we have to think about creating more value. We have to really think about the output increasing, not just the costs of that output decreasing, if that makes sense. So all these trends are pointing towards quite fragile supply chains in the UK. So what can we do about it? There we go. Some of you may be aware of something which we call Industry 4.0 in Germany. I was talking to a West Midlands manufacturer, the managing director, a few weeks ago, and he said, I don't know what Industry 4.0 means. Every time somebody says Industry 4.0 to me, the person is trying to sell me something, and it's something that I don't need. So I tend to be quite careful about how I use it, and I tend to not overuse the phrase Industry 4.0. But in Germany, it does mean something. It seems to encompass a certain strength within the German manufacturing supply chains, and it seems to suggest that they are focusing their efforts on something very strong, which is putting robots into factories and automating things and becoming very efficient and growing their own productivity in that way. If you compare that to what is taking place in Japan, it's slightly different. In the first instance, it looks very similar, but it's actually a bit different. What they're more interested in is having robots mixed with humans within the environment, and humans making engineering decisions whilst the robots and the machines take out the actions. That seems to be something which is subtly and critically different to what's happening in Germany. Then if you look at the US as well, what they're very interested in is what they call distributed manufacturing. It seems to really suit the American character that everybody can manufacture things, produce things from their own garage. And that looks like something which is very fundamental to the nature of US manufacturing, and where their own development in digitising things and connecting things together in a digital way will arise from. But where is the same story, same narrative for UK manufacturing? Nobody's really done it. So what we did, we decided to work with the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, who you may or may not have heard of, and the Institute for Manufacturing, to have a look at what was really required for the digitalisation of UK manufacturing supply chains. And we came up with a definition of what it means for the UK. A very interesting one is the first bullet point. It's the collaborative nature of the advances that digital capabilities and technologies will let you do. Collaboration means better communication. It means better decision making based on more up-to-date information that digital technologies can provide you with. There's been a lot of work in the last few years linking better collaboration with higher productivity growth, and that is something which digital technologies within manufacturing supply chains can easily enable. On top of that, we identified a number of different scenarios within which companies working within the supply chains will adopt digital technologies. I'll come on to that in a minute, but that's quite interesting. At the same time, on a more technical level, you will have different kind of systems connecting to each other with delivering different things, connecting with people in different ways. And also you will get new physical technologies and digital technologies coming into the manufacturing supply chains throughout the life of the product. I said I would mention the scenarios to you. Right. So we identified 10 scenarios within which companies at various points in the manufacturing supply chain would adopt digital technologies. I'll go through them. I'll kind of group them as best I can. The best thing to do is first of all to look at 1 and 6. 1 and 6 are basically, if you're a company within a supply chain, you have inputs and you have outputs. If you can imagine just in time on steroids, that's what number 1 is. Basically, you don't have to ask your suppliers to get the thing to your factory gate or at a particular time. Your machines will be talking to their machines and getting that thing into your factory through your gates on time to spec. And number 6 is what happens when that leaves the factory gate. Because if you're in a supply chain, somebody's input is somebody else's output. So those two are very closely related. If you look at 2 to 5, that's quite an interesting group, because that is what other people call the smart factory. So at the first instance, you're getting people commissioning the factories entirely rendered in a digital format before they even start to put anything on the shop floor. That reduces commissioning times. It also means they can be recreated throughout the globe and all things like that, and that is a real strong advance that is already taking place, particularly in OEMs and primes at the moment, not really filtered down to the supply chain yet. Once you've got these things, you can use all these capabilities to schedule your production processes to be in line with those of all your partners and things like that. As well as your scheduling being digitised and being automated and being aligned with your customers and your suppliers, you should be able to use the same system to manufacture many more things than you could have done before. You'll be more flexible and adapt to customer need much better than you previously could. And at the same time, that will give rise to new production technologies such as 3D printing, additive manufacturing, digital forming, all kinds of different production processes which use the CAD model as the starting point in a way which doesn't always take place at the moment. Well, that's the smart factory. We were talking a few minutes ago about where the UK strengths are. It seemed to us that coming out of the research that the real opportunities for UK manufacturing to take a lead aren't necessarily in 2 to 5. They need to do that just to remain internationally competitive. But to take a lead internationally, there seems to be a bigger opportunity in the through life aspects of the product, where you link the design through to the life of the product, not just the production of it as well. And 7 to 10, those scenarios, describe some of the things that you can do. You can look at your entire supply chain, both upstream and downstream, in real time. You can ensure and assure your product quality throughout the supply chain, not just in your factory. You can design the network such that it meets the customer's needs much more quickly, much more effectively than before, if you can see everything. And very importantly, it gives you the ability to take information from your product when it's in use throughout its life, and for you to make decisions and offer services off the back of that. That's product lifecycle management, obviously. So those are the 10 scenarios that we came up with the IFM, the Institute for Manufacturing. We then did something on top of that. We thought, what is the ease of which each of these scenarios could be developed? So if you look at this graph, don't worry too much about what it means. I'll tell you what it means. Those scenarios that are on the top right-hand corner of that graph are the ones that the people we engaged with in the room, they told us that they were the easiest to achieve. The ones on the bottom left of that graph are the ones that are the hardest to achieve. Now, if you look at what the distribution of them are, the easiest ones to achieve are the top right, are like the smart factory type ones. They're the ones that are the responsibility of a single company to adopt. The ones on the top left, the hardest to achieve, are the ones where you need all your partners to move in the same direction and to align their activities and the behaviour in the same way. And if you remember what I said a few minutes ago, the real opportunity for UK manufacturing appears to lie in those that are on the bottom left. The UK will benefit the most from digitising its manufacturing supply chains the most if we can get through life and design capabilities connected in such a way that they provide services and products and all the things that they offer throughout the life of the product. But that's the hardest to achieve, and that appears to us to be the sweet spot of where standards creation, standards development and adoption really need to be focused, and something where we could help the UK take a lead. I mentioned that we were working with the High Value Manufacturing Catapult and the Institute for Manufacturing. We carried on working with those two organisations, and we came up with a standard strategy for the UK where we'd hopefully support UK manufacturers essentially to be able to realise the benefits of digitalisation and at the same time make themselves more resilient. We would do this not just by improving the labour productivity, but also improving the non-labour productivity, and more importantly, increasing the value of the products and services that they could offer, and thus boosting not just economic output but employment as well. So we identified 5 strategic priorities where we thought standards could help. They would be in designing products such that they could be manufactured and used in a digital environment. With the increased use of simulation, digital twins, things like that, it became obvious that if people are going to use models more and more, how do we trust the information and the things that are arising from those things, and how do we make decisions based on models when we are in the recent past have never done that. The other one is the third one relates to companies in the supply chain using these vast amounts of data that will be coming up in more quickly than ever before, and allowing them to make decisions that are of economic benefit to them and their customers. How could they use those data to really extract wisdom from them and to do so and to give real value-added services and products to the customers? You've probably seen some things in the press in the last few years which say that UK SMEs aren't very good at using the data that they already have, never mind that the data that we'll get in the future. So it's something which is not easy, and which will require some significant new capabilities being adopted by the supply chains. Another major barrier, of course, to adoption is people losing their IP. Nobody wants to do that. They don't want to lose their IP or their customers. And nobody's going to get into this area and digitising themselves if they think someone's going to hack in and steal everything. And so we need to sort that out pretty rapidly. Not only that, you need to protect your IP. You want to get paid for the IP that you produce, or that is being used. And so it becomes an issue of rights management. Not unlike, say, the music industry. If somebody uses your IP, you want to get paid for it. So we need to make sure that happens. And by no means unimportant is the fact that we want everything to be interoperable. We want a genuine plug-and-play environment within which machines can be fitted into these networks and that they can all work together in order to do that. So that's the challenges that we're talking about in terms of what standards could achieve. But what are the standards that would enable that to happen? Well, they're listed on the right-hand side. that obviously need something around interoperability. We need something which creates the best practice around supply chain capability, to upskill's probably the wrong word, but to really enable those companies to do things that they can't currently do. Digitising our supply chains will have a very significant impact on the way we design things. Design will become a very much more collaborative process than it was previously. And so we need to think about what best practice in that area looks like. We need governance and best practice and standards in the governance, security and assurance of the data that are coming from various places. And another area where the UK could well provide some leadership is in service innovation. Manufacturers are increasingly turning to offering services based around their products, so-called product service systems. It is an area where the UK seems to have an opportunity and some strength. Everybody points to our strengths in entrepreneurship and being very agile and responding to things. We're not very good at investing in technology. That seems to be the flip side of this. But that does appear to be an area where some best practice and standards is required. And so you may be familiar with a lot of noise being spoken about around the industrial strategy. We talked to some potential partners in that area to develop something, that standards creation piece, which fits within an overall national framework. We think it would look something like this. The standards piece is obviously number 2. That's the themes which I've just described to you. But that would be best served if it was linked to the research base, which is A, already in place, and B, being developed and further invested in. And you'll probably hear some announcements by the government, whoever it is, in the next few weeks to that end. So we'd like a standards programme to link in with that research. But we'd also like implementation efforts, i.e. those things, those activities where people like the catapult go into SMEs and to try and upskill them. We'd like that to be linked quite closely to the standards creation. We'd like part of that activity where they implement best practice in digital manufacturing to be adoption of standards and to feed that back. And we also think the way that assurance and certification will take place will change radically as well. And so we need to think about how that will take place. So that's the kind of approach that we think is required. So that's my last slide. This is basically just a summary of what I think the opportunities are for digital manufacturing and standards, and how they will achieve supply chain resilience. They will make our supply chain more competitive through using digital technologies to increase labour productivity and non-labour productivity, and also by providing the customers with better products and services that better meet their need. The ways in which standards will do that, we will have standards in those 5 areas to do that. An important partner in this will be the high value manufacturing catapult, but there will be others. If you're interested in working with us on this, please do let me know. It's not something which you can yet take part because we've not got the programme up and running, but it's something that we'd like to do, and we intend to be rolling out later this year. Thank you very much for your attention.